Welcome to the Silicon Fox podcast, where we explore the habits and stories of high performers. I'm your host, Mitchell Eschner. Well, awesome. Sean, thank you so much for hopping on the Silicon Fox podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, cool. I always like to start these off by just giving you the chance to tell us a little bit about yourself. There's obviously a good bit of questions that we want to discuss and topics in the health and wellness or community worlds. But before we do that, I'd just love to give it a little deep dive into you.
Sure. I'm actually sitting here not too far from where I grew up. I grew up in southern New Hampshire. My father is an Austrian, actually first generation. Met my mom, who's American, in the late '60s. I think she was doing the typical minibus tour around Europe thing, but he followed her back over here, and I was born over here, and raised in southern New Hampshire. Took a 31-year detour to New York City, and then became sort of a pandemic refugee and returned here with my wife and two kids, and ended up here in the woods again. So my background, very rural and bucolic, and then very, very urban for a long time. And I guess somewhere along the way, I guess during those urban years, I began to become very interested in health and wellness, and I guess just reclaiming some of that. And then I guess by extension, that led me to Wanderlust and then to Eudēmonia. So here I am.
I love it. What was the precursor? What did you end up doing for those 30 years in the city?
Yeah, well, I started in the unbelievably healthy business of music, where I spent, the countless nights until 4 a.m. in clubs, promoting various bands and, trying to sell records, and eventually an artist relations, artist management's company. And so, that was not the healthiest phase of my life, but it was a lot of fun in my 20s and 30s. But somewhere along the way, I think personally started to get older and, a little more conscious of that. And we had a little bit of a interesting coincidence where my business partner in the music business was a record label called Velour. Jeff, his wife, Skylar, who was also a very good friend of mine from college, she opened a yoga studio right upstairs from our record offices and music offices, and sort of became this little cross pollination between the music scene and the budding health and wellness scene in sort of the early 2000s. And that eventually led to us to create, I guess, our twist on a music festival, which is sort of more like the world's first health and wellness, mass participation health and wellness gathering called Wanderlust. And we launched that from our Brooklyn offices in California and Tahoe in 2009, and that became a great success. And I think really sort of my foray into the world that combines, I guess, festival and mass participation events and health and wellness. So that's really how it all started.
I love it. It's so interesting to see um, kind of older generations starting to realize a lot of things in health and then become much more health conscious. You see probably some of the most successful companies come out of people that didn't care about health and wellness for long periods of their time. And then, it started to get personal and people built great businesses. But then you see a trickle down effect because in the Gen Z community, it's now, Gen Z millennials, like how much alcohol is being consumed. It's like almost negligible. It's crazy rates. And then all these other things and everyone's so health conscious. So it kind of trickles down. So curious to see if it upkeeps. But I do think that through some of what we'll talk about and through communities and festivals and experiences like that, we'll definitely have strength in that. Well, cool. I mean, fundamentally, I really want to cater this conversation to building communities in the health and wellness world, getting excitement. A lot of this in-person stuff, it's pretty different than a lot of what we talk about in the podcast, whether it's like deep into health research, whatever else. But it's a really, really foundationally important thing because one of the things we find out and talk about all the time is these new health tools that tell you what to do and then you never do it, or you don't learn about all these things. And fundamentally it almost always boils down to community, accountability, fun, gamification, this in person, and like especially with so much tech in the world, this reversion back. So I kind of want to understand what was the spark behind this. I just kind of want to start from the genesis of beyond your personal stories, what made you decide to start going into the event space, and how did that all come about with the first one, which was Wonderlust?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of things going on for me. I mean, one thing is that we started, as I mentioned, we had drifted into becoming not just a record label, but also an artist management company. And that led us to have a lot of touring bands, and some of the touring bands started playing at these new generation of, circa 2000s music festivals like Bonnaroo, and we were going to NOLA for Jazz Fest all the time and things like that. And so, just it was around the creation of all of these new Austin City Limits was born somewhere around there in Bonnaroo. And, obviously Coachella had been around for a while, but it started to explode at that time. And so, started to become part of that world. And of course, that just naturally makes you think like, well, if I were going to do one of these, what would I do? And I would say that, while I wasn't really even at that point, very deeply into the health and wellness world, what I was into was space, natural beauty, not having fences, not having 17-year-olds puking on my shoes. Like I wanted a festival experience that was somehow like where you could get away from the music as well as be part of it. And so for me, I think I kind of like tiptoed my way into it where when we designed the concept for Wanderlust, which was very much a mashup of a traditional music festival and a large scale giant yoga retreat. Like I was much more focused on, okay, what's the music festival experience like? And, we designed it where there were no fences once you got in and you could go up on a meadow and sit and listen. And it was like very open, beautiful, natural, and just, I think, a very elevated experience. And then, my partners were very focused on, who are the best yoga teachers in the world? How do we deliver a world class, wellness experience at the same time during the day? And so I kind of backed my way into it a little bit, but I think, both of those things remain true for me. In other words, that there needs to be I always think of the arts and the inspiration that music and culture brings as being critical to the human condition and to the inspiration of the human condition, and just as much as I suppose, in our case, the wellness side of traditional yoga or meditation or working out, and I think they're all part of the wellness equation.
How do you think about balance when it comes to this kind of thing? Right, like you want to create this free flowing and cultural relevance and movement, but you also want to promote healthy things. And whether people are coming to explore vices, which often occurs at like festivals, how do you think about the balance and making those things align when you go about building this excitement and relevance?
Yeah. I mean, I think that one thing we did with Wanderlust from the beginning was to become where we were completely non-preachy. I mean, we took the yoga seriously, we took the meditation seriously. We obviously were there with people who would, tell you things that we thought were good for you. But at the same time, if people wanted to drink some wine or, smoke some weed and dance at night, that was completely acceptable. And I think that, there was this message of, we're all creatures, and community and celebration are just as much part of, a healthy lifestyle as, working out and practicing and meditating. And so, I think that was part of it. And I've tried to carry that through. And I think that there's this element of non-judgmentalness and also to some degree, I don't want to say tribalism. That's something that I kind of started to think about a little bit later. I mean, obviously the idea of practicing yoga and meditation is kind of almost like belonging to a tribe, I suppose, just as, cold plunging is to a certain set,
Yeah,
today. But I think that, I think the key is that, we're all individuals and we're all bio individual as well. And, practices that work incredibly well and resonate with me may not resonate with you. And so I think it's a misguided thing to apply, the human instinct towards tribalism towards the practices that you recommend or don't recommend. I think there's a wide range
sure.
of things. And so I try to always keep a very open canvas at Wanderlust. And I think we're doing the same thing at Eudēmonia.
Yeah, no, that's super fair. Um, I'm trying to, as I think a lot about, communities in the health and wellness world, I think one of the biggest concerns people jump to is like the how. Everybody wants to build a community, everybody wants to belong. How are you able to pull off kind of these mass events beyond you've kind of talked a little bit about the what, once you get there, it's a free flowing, it's exciting, great. But even like the inception phase of it, we understand how you got to the idea, but how do you succeed at the idea, I guess is where I'm alluding to.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, we've done it a couple times, but I mean, I don't, I always feel like there is a little bit of alchemy to the thing where, uh, you do what you know, which is I know how to make a good experience. I know how to find the right venue. I know how to program in a way that's diverse and interesting to different groups. But what you never really know is who's going to come. And ultimately, an event is sort of defined almost more by your other attendees than it is actually by the talent on the stages in some ways. I mean, it's like all the spaces in between where you're interacting with people and, feeling a vibe that really defines a lot about the event. Yes, it also helps when you have a headliner you're fascinated to see, whether that's, Metallica or whether that's Huberman, depending on the context. But I think that the interesting thing is, that. And so how do you do that? Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I think yeah. And I think in my case, our case, the one thing I would say is that there's something incredibly self-selecting about a wellness festival of any kind. As soon as you bring in yoga or meditation or physical fitness or, let's call it mental optimization or mental health or psychedelics. I mean, these are the types of people that want to think about that and care enough about those practices that they're going to show up in person in a community setting to explore that for 1 or more days. It's already a certain kind of person who is, I guess, somewhere along the way, a seeker of knowledge, a seeker of optimization, a seeker of good health. And I think that just sort of creates also that kind of person tends to be, they tend to be good people, for lack of a better word. I mean, they're people who
Sure.
are, and it's sort of, and so I guess the luck I had was, I've always wondered about, like, if you were trying to create, I don't know, a metal festival or something, which I've never tried to do, like, I mean, there's certainly a vibe you're going for there too. And I guess who your audience is and just as well. And I'm sure that it's self-selecting in its own way for a certain vibe. And as long as you hit that and satisfy it, it's good. But in our case, people get there, they get to our events, they meet people, they're eating healthy food, they're doing healthy things, they're meditating, they're working out, they're learning. And I think it just tends to breed an openness and a kind of community spirit that just is self reinforcing. And so, you know, um, I don't really know specifically what the answer to that question is, I guess,
No,
but
it's a hard
I
one.
think there are all these ingredients that fulfill fulfill the promise of the event.
How great, I guess, you talk a little bit about being open and letting the audience interact and just kind of this flow state type vibe, if you will. How
Yeah.
granular do you get with details when you put on these kinds of events, these kinds of shows? There's so much that can go in, but there's also so much, hey, let's just let it happen. And I'm just curious, there's someone that's pulled it off successfully. How
Yeah.
granular do you get with details when it comes to booths and whatever? I mean, it can get much more detailed than that, but how often do you guys think
Yeah,
about those
I,
things?
I mean, I could definitely give you the world's most boring podcast right now if you wanted me to. So, because I think the answer is incredibly granular, and it's just granular in a way that you can't even imagine. I mean, it's like I obsess over the language of what telling you to click the scheduler and how to explain to people how to use it, and I obsess. I mean, you have to obsess over everything so that when you're on site, nobody's obsessing over anything other than each other and the experience they're having. Like, it's a weird thing. It's sort of like the more
That's
you
fascinating.
obsess in advance, the less people have to deal with things that are uncomfortable or a feeling of not knowing what to do or where to go. So, I mean, just to give you one very simple example that's very different
Yeah.
in my events than in most is that, we, from the Wanderlust days and through Eudēmonia, we put this giant menu of incredible offerings from lectures and talks and movement classes and treatments online, and you can schedule them in advance. But not only are you reserving your seat or saying, like, I want to go, you're actually literally reserving your seat. So we've tracked the capacity in each room and in each venue and each time slot. And when you sign up, your spot's guaranteed. So now, sure, you got to do a little more work up front to figure out where you want to be and go. But now, once you're there, you don't have to run to the next venue. You don't have to worry about getting in line and not making it in. Like, that whole stress of capacity and getting in is completely removed from your experience. So I mean, that's just one small example of something that we do that not everyone does. And I think that all of those little types of decisions add up to creating an experience where hopefully there's a lot of beauty, there's no lines, there's nothing that's interfering or getting in between you and the experience you're meant to have, which is obviously one of self-exploration and knowledge and learning and fun. So I'd say there's no amount of obsessing that's probably enough.
My like deeper question even to this is like the
Yeah.
how do you put yourself in this mindset? It's always like the most exciting thing hearing, a visionary talk about their idea and then how granular they can get. I'm this to me, it's more applicable on like the software and technical side to say like, hey,
Yeah.
this is the really granular user flow and every point of friction where I get so lost. And I think so many people are fascinated by is when you come to an event, especially as a business owner, and you say, like, look at the other side, is like, what did it take to organizationally put in here to really achieve this mission? And it's like really kind of these in-person experiences have such emotion kind of drawing experience throughout that
Mhm.
it's difficult to cultivate. So like you got diving in deeper. I mean, you gave a good example, but just like are there aren't any other non-obvious ones? And boring, not boring. I think this is a fascinating topic. So even if it's like
Okay, cool.
even if it's a granular, boring like thing, just trying to see how intentional people be. Like, do you put yourself in the mind of an attendee and say, okay, what would I want to see across all these things? Like, are you building it the same way that someone builds a product and says, let's do all this customer discovery, let's figure out what's the best way to click, and is it this color or that color, and is it these kinds of things,
Yeah.
or is it how
Well,
do
I
you do
mean,
that?
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, well, first of all, we do deal quite a bit with, software and UI and UX and all of that stuff because we have to have a website that guides you to a certain kind of experience. And then also the usability of all those pre-event things that I was describing is really positive. So I'm pretty familiar with what you're describing on the more technical digital side. And I do think a lot of it is very similar, actually. It's sort of like, I mean, if you think about, I don't know, the way that a color of a button affects clicks, I mean, you could similarly think about the way that the positioning of a stage or the flow of people around a physical space affects, people's
Yeah.
experience, what they're seeing when, whether they, are even aware of an experience, whether they're interacting, how they stop. So, I mean, there's a lot of little things. I mean, I'd say a lot of if you think of the stages, and we have like 40 at Eudēmonia, and all of those are kind of anchor points in a way. Like we know that at a certain time, someone's going to choose to be in those rooms. So those are the fixed points around which everything else is free flowing in between. So there's always a 30-minute in between each session. So now there's 30 minutes that people are going to flow out and in and through the world. So that people's attention is captured probably when they're in a class, whether it's a workout or a lecture, because that's already being handled by hopefully the amazing talent you've hand selected and put on the stage. So then you just got to think about, okay, the 30 minutes in between them, what are they seeing? What are they feeling? And so that's where, surprise and delights, we have, actors in, they're actually ballet trained ballet artists who are dressed in Greek
Awesome.
costumes that are popping up and appearing in, corner. We have like pop up music, almost like busking appearing in other things. We have soapbox lectures where people stand up and, give kind of an impromptu talk sort of out of the
Yeah.
way. We have, food and beverage experiences. All of these things are thought through to kind of fill the day in a way that you haven't scheduled so that there's still this sort of random surprise and delight and also these opportunities, I suppose, for people to get together and meet each other because something happens that causes people to stop and say, "Oh, that's cool." So, yeah, I mean, we think about that all the time.
How do you think about the synergies
Yeah.
of this, like in this flow, 30 minutes? How do you think about the synergies of different events and the motion it reacts, like not to overstimulate, not to understimulate, especially just because I don't know if you mentioned it or in general, we like to talk about this all the time in the health world or just like the psyche. We're all so different for what someone loves, someone else hates and is like, why am I here? But yet some of these events often I haven't been to one of these specific events, so I can't comment here, but like the Lollapaloozas of the world somehow generate the same emotion out of most people. Of course, there's people that have bad experiences, but across the masses, they're able to pull out this emotion. How do you think about that balance? Are you walking through this and thinking about it that way, or is there some science behind this? How does it work?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that the key in our world, I mean, I think it's like the quiet spaces and the spaces for restoration effectively. And of course, we think about that much more consciously than you probably would. Although they do think about it now, Lollapalooza and other places too. I mean, there's been enough experience on that too. But I would say that, for us, we're not trying to keep you in the fully amped state all the time because I think that's not really healthy or balanced. It starts to feel sort of unnatural at a wellness conference of any kind. And so, our world is also to provide the nooks and crannies where you can go and sit on a meditation cushion, or we have, these soundscape rooms, which are like just super high tech sound baths, with quadraphonic sound where you can lie down and there's like
Awesome.
sometimes imagery, sometimes it's just, I mean, and it's like complete, bodily restoration away from the crowds, away from all the sensory stimulus that's going on in the other room. And I think that, that cycle, and you could think of that in Wanderlust, we thought about often as morning to night. So morning was often more contemplative, inwardly focused, meditation, nature, and the day sort of became more outward, external, and social as you progress through the day till you have peak experience at night on a music stage dancing to some artist you love,
Awesome.
right? That was the life cycle of that day. And I think there's definitely some of that at Eudaimonia too, although what it's escalating towards is usually the headliner, if it's like Huberman on stage or it's, Ritual or whatever. And then you're kind of released out into the world, for dinners and more celebrations and social. So, there's a similar thing, but I think, the idea is to start people in a, meditative inward state and bring them slowly towards an outgoing external communal state. And that's worked very well for us.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. It's just like it's out there for me, and it's so exciting to hear how people can think through this because even like the allusion to morning to night and that kind of thing is it's fascinating, and I'm like a recipient of it, but I haven't been able to think of it on the opposing end. I'm curious as to your take here on the macro. I kind of alluded to this a little bit with communities, and especially in health and wellness, a reversion back to communities when we've got straight away. We've gotten so digital, Strava, whatever else you're posting about all your stuff, but you're not doing it together. I can assume you're probably bullish on communities, but maybe just adding some color here as to where our community is headed. What is the future of experiences in the health and wellness world? We're seeing some cool stuff. What you guys are doing with
Really cool
Eudaimonia,
stuff.
Running Man. I unfortunately didn't go, but like that kind of thing.
It's
A bunch
amazing.
of
Yeah.
different stuff. So would love to hear what you think about that.
Othership and places like that, which are
Yeah,
doing an
yeah,
incredible job in physical spaces. Yeah. No, I think there's so much cool stuff going on. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess yeah. I'm long community and short digital right now, for
yeah,
lack of a better word. I just think that I think that digital is I think people are really trying to pull back for their mental health. I think the science is kind of also in that certainly social media and certain aspects of a life lived online are not necessarily good for us, certainly not psychically fulfilling in the way that they should be. And I think that the whole world obviously is, I think, pretty palpably becoming more and more commodified in all areas. And, the one thing that is not replicable and never the same is a community experience, right? It's a unique, it's a moment in time. We've gone pretty consciously, I don't want to call it anti-digital, but let's say it non-digital in the sense that, we're not live streaming. And when people ask, like, can I watch it? And we're like, sorry, you have to be there. And, we're doing that not so much because of I'm not doing it because I don't like digital or I'm anti-digital. I'm not, I think we all need probably to use it a little less, but it's an incredibly valuable set of tools that I use every day myself. I think it's more just that, you know, I don't think you get the value of what your ticket or what the experience is unless you're there in person. And because so much of the value is that intangible value of sharing these moments and these knowledge with other people. And you can't sell that and you can't market that, but you feel it when you're at an event and you don't feel it when you watch the same event online. And that's just because of how our
sure.
brains have evolved and our nervous system has evolved. And so I really just believe that that's the value proposition here is the in-person aspect. And, if you're not ready to come this year, then I'll wait until you are. That's not to say we're not going to release the content. We are going to release some content. We'll probably release a lot more next year than we did this year, but it's like, it'll be content for content's sake, not at all pretending to be approximating the experience of actually attending the event. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
No,
that's, yeah.
yeah. I mean, I want to dive deeper into it in terms of like what does this space kind of turn into? Because even when
Mhm.
we say wellness, I mean, so events can get really macro and it can come across, music, what health. Obviously, they can all converge, but health and wellness, even within health and wellness, you start to see a divergence, whether it's wearables or platforms or tests, or the more wellness folks, the more science-based folks. It kind of diverges into these micro communities. I think we're relatively early in these kind of more new othership and you guys type communities. where do you think this lands? Does this space get more saturated with more events that are generalized, and then people get more niche? What do those niches look like? Just trying to understand how you forecast the landscape because we are so early in this in-person
Yeah.
communities and they are so hot right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think the natural tendency is for things to go from broad to atomized. I mean, I think it's just entropy, which applies also maybe to human formations too. It's
Yeah.
sort of like the longer a particular thing happens, the more it fragments into different interest groups and sects and other things. I mean, on the other hand, if the strength of humans is actually to resist and reverse entropy, temporarily. That's what building something is. And, I'm very consciously trying to reverse that atomization here with this event. My goal is really to bring together what you mentioned as the science-based community and the OG wellness community, and then maybe mix in, some biohackers and some actual conventional Western medicine doctors and people of that nature, and just see by bringing those people together, like if we can bridge that divide and form kind of a new center that I think is a little more sound and grounded, but still retains, I don't know, you could think of it as ancient wisdom or, some of the proven practices of the past. So, my goal is very much to synthesize, not to atomize. And I suppose that's not like just a commercial goal of like, oh, I want a lot of people to come. It's actually, there's a sort of philosophy underneath that I myself find that the way my brain works is that, I see, ancient wisdom as kind of like a kernel, like a fossil that you would find in the ground that you're like, I'll dig this up and see where this leads me. And it's probably an indication that something was there, or something worth discovering could be found, but it doesn't mean that it's true. And that's why we have science. And then, when you can marry those two, I think is where some of the more powerful, you know, modern practices or like current practices have arisen. I mean, just watching, for instance, as an example, like meditation get rehabilitated, whatever. It's an ancient thousands of year old practice. All of a sudden, it started getting studied in Western universities. And now it's like
Yeah.
everybody who's a captain of industry is doing it because it's okay. It's scientific also, and it works, but it was a bunch of hippies 25 years ago that
Yeah.
were doing it, And so it's really interesting to see that. And I think there's so much more to unpack in that genre. And I love the idea of bringing people together to build that. Yeah. So, anyways, I mean,
I
I
love it.
guess I would say to answer your question, then I mean, I do see to be increasingly, niche focused. Microgroups doing in special interest, but I think there's always room for, people who are fighting against that trend and trying to really create a big, broad center. I think that's true in music. There are still those big OG festivals that bring all sorts of genres and people together, and I would like to be that for wellness. But I do think the trend will be, as you described, towards more, atomization.
I don't have like any of the, I don't know if you happen to have it either, but like the data or numbers behind the previous type festivals and now wellness kind of coming into the scene. Do you think this becomes the predominantly larger force of in-person events? Is because there's also like the value of, I don't know if I want to call it trauma bonding, but when I go to an event and it's like a dinner with someone and it's a big group of people, the level that we bond versus we go to workout together often has a delta, and it's stronger when we go through something together. We go through an experience, music
Mhm.
festival, workout, whatever it is. Do you think the
Yep.
health and wellness world starts to overtake music and whatever else there is in person, or is this kind of like just a new segment in the market of events?
Yeah, I would love to be that bullish that I think that was going to happen, but I mean, I think that there's a what's the word? I mean, Gen Z has surprised me in a pleasant way. I mean, I think it's really interesting to see
Yeah.
how there've just been these massive shifts in people's behavior and interest level at a younger age. I mean, in my generation, I'm very much Gen X, and for me, nobody thought about wellness really. I mean, nobody. I had a few friends who were kind of into it and whatever, but until, 30s and then into 40s. And, and then it just sort of, there was this natural progression of starting to care more as your body breaks down or as you start worrying about your own
Exactly.
mortality, right? But Gen Z has flipped that and started caring at a really young age. And I think that's amazing. Like, I don't know whether I believe that trend will hold. I mean, if you look historically, it's certainly not been the usual case, and I think
Yeah.
most generations of younger people have tended towards the devil may care self-destructive side of things, not the, self-preservationist, optimization side. But if it does, great. But I guess I wouldn't bet on it. I think it's more of a unique kind of Gen Z moment, and there'll probably be a backlash where the kids of Gen Z will be out there boozing it
That'll
up
be
every night. So that's
that's an interesting prediction. We'll have to see.
yeah, yeah, we'll see if I'm right
I am
about
very
that.
curious. I am very curious about that one specifically.
Yeah, I bet.
What kind of shifting gears a little bit into the health and wellness world on like the actual health side of it outside of events. What has been interesting to you via building Eudaimonia and the summit, um, with bringing on guests and like what is predominantly winning across trends? You talked about you want this to be kind of a safe haven for again wellness, PCPs, like, all the above, people in the medical space, or in the health and wellness space. What has been really interesting across trends that you've seen when you built the summit across like, hey, who's getting the strongest viewership or who's really dragging an audience with them? Is it the form factor of the media? Is it the content? What is just kind of, want to understand your thoughts here a little bit on the actual content and like the topics that'll be talked about at the summit.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I can. I mean, I think, obviously we have a generalized, I mean, the breadth of eudaimonia is really to cover human health holistically. And that's, obviously physical health, but also mental health. And then even I think a step beyond that, which we think of as purpose, meaning, almost like the philosophical element to human fulfillment and self-realization, self-actualization. So, there's like all three of those things mixed together. And so at one level, you can learn about your mitochondrial health and, muscle health and how to, optimize physical performance, or you could learn about, psychedelics and mental health and, PTSD, or you could also sit in a lecture on eudaimonia this itself, like the concept of human flourishing or human, like, what does it mean to be, a happy and fulfilled person. And so I think, we've got this incredible breadth. So it's hard for me to say, one really wins out over the other. I have shied away from going too deep on the philosophy because
Sure.
I always joke with my team that like the surest way to go out of business quickly is to do a festival on philosophy. It's like people would be running screaming in the other direction, even though it probably would be a lot of fun if you did it right. It's just, it's not very marketable. But so I mean, of course, most think people are drawn in because they want to look better, they want to feel better, they want to sleep better, they want the core aspects, and I think obviously we see a lot of interest in that stuff. But I think what's really interesting is like Maslow's pyramid itself, there is sort of a march up the pyramid, which is sort of like, okay, all right, I'm safe. I'm warm. Okay, great. Oh, I have, relationships and that is good. Then, oh, like I have a meaningful career. And then you start to think more and more about it. Well, I think there's almost like a physical, like a bodily progression of that too. It's like, okay, good. I'm healthy now. I'm feeling strong. I'm like optimized. And then, okay, my mental health has gotten better. I feel really good. But what's left? And then you start to think about, it's like, what do I do with my life? What's the thing that I will feel proudest of when I'm sitting at the end of my days? And all of those kind of questions, I think, once you're sort of free from the like basics of like, I don't have cardiovascular disease anymore, I'm not
Yeah.
obese anymore, then you start to think about some of these other things. And I'm not saying you can't do it all at once, which obviously I don't mean to imply in any way that people who are,
That's fair.
diseased or overweight can't think about their bigger thing. I just mean to say that, it's almost like I think of it as almost a building block way of sort of building, your best self. And maybe there are orders of progression, that you can go through. So anyway, I think a lot of people are there for different reasons, I guess is the bottom line. And I hope that, I hope what happens is that people discover something that they didn't really come there for. I mean, that's sort of my biggest hope is that, the moment that excites them most, it wasn't the discussion of protein that they could have also probably have heard online, with different debates in and out about whether, plant protein or animal protein or how many grams of protein or all those things. I mean, of
Yeah.
course that's super interesting to a lot of people, but it's like, I think there's something else that happens that you find and you encounter there, hopefully that you hadn't considered, that is maybe the more transformational thing for many people. And that would be my hope.
what do you think, like, I guess the second half of that question then at least has this, I don't know if I wanna call it strongest following, but kind of the biggest backing and appeal. I know that the goal of this event, and I think that's beautiful. That's obviously so inclusive of all these kind of backgrounds and foundations that people come from. But what is the strongest like following? It might be clear from the headliners, so maybe this question gets answered by just looking at that. But there seems to be, because like that's, I think it's a kind of an important question to understand, because if you understand that, you can look at it through the lens of like, okay, well, one, if I want to start getting into the space, where should I start? Or if two, I want to, like, on the business side of this, the space, what has the strongest market right now? Um, I maybe I'll answer this
Yeah.
question as well, but just kind of curious your thoughts.
Well, no, I mean, I think I mean, there's funny because there's like what I thought it would be, and then there's what it is thus far.
Yeah, so
You
I'm
know,
curious as to.
so what I mean, when you have like, I mean, this year we've got, Huberman and Hyman and Rich Roll. So, those are a bunch of other very big names. But, just looking at the top of the thing. And I think that you might think that the kind of optimizer biohack or that person would be the number one represented person in the audience, and actually it's not. It's I think right now it's OG Wellness is actually probably the number one
What
attendee
is
group, but
define
the
that? Define
the
OG
OG
wellness, make sure.
Wellness? Well, it's
Yeah.
more for me, like, I guess that was what I think of as the Wanderlust audience, which is, and the difference is subtle, but for me, OG Wellness is sort of coming at wellness from more of the ancient wisdom side of the spectrum than the modern scientific, and so more holistic than, if you want to think of, there's an atomistic view, I think, in biohacking, which is often like, I take this compound, I do this specific thing, I get that result, right? It's all very, it's broken down, it's effect driven, and it's very much not necessarily a holistic view of the organism. They're targeting specific things for specific reasons. There's the holistic, but not specific version of wellness, which is much more like yoga and meditation and, contemplation and forest bathing and, personal spirituality. And you could go through a ton of different practices there. And that audience has, I think, to some degree come along because a lot of our databases in my history of Wanderlust, they've been intrigued by this. And I also think there is a very marked cultural trend, even in OG wellness, towards much more interest in scientific proof and evidence to support the practices that they already had. So I think that
Interesting.
cultural trend has driven a lot of those folks to Eudēmonia, which is this safe space in some ways because it's the middle zone, right? We're very focused on science, but we're very open to examining these and bringing in these ancient practices in the context of scientific evidence and finding support for them. So I think that that's something. But the biohacker community, they're there for sure, and we've got like Dave Asprey and a bunch of other folks that have been very supportive, and a lot of folks coming in there. But we are certainly broader in scope, and also I think just the vibe for us. I mean, I noticed Dave rebranded his conference this year to Beyond, which I think is the recognition in the biohacker world that maybe it's not as deterministic, and maybe it's like, I guess there. What is my criticism? I'm trying to put a good word on it. It is a criticism, not a, or a critique, I should say, not a criticism. It's I feel like sometimes. Sorry, I should have put that on mute, I guess. I sometimes feel like the biohacker community, started out from it's very results driven. It was very much sort of like, okay, what can I do to get this result? And you started looking at supplements or compounds or particular practice, and it was a sort of in the same way that modern medicine has broken down and compartmentalized health into very specific small regions where, medical doctors today know an incredible amount about the functioning of the liver or, whatever your specialty may be. I think that same reductivist approach is done in biohacking. And I think that, to some degree, then now there's an expansion of that to think, okay, these things work and this is great, but that's not the whole me, and that's not the whole of health, and that's not the whole of my potential for optimization. And so there's now a broader lens applying or sort of starting to be explored in that community. So hopefully we bring those folks into our world, because we are obviously very much engaged in that support. And that's where, I think things like psychedelics started to blow that open. Like psychedelics are a really interesting one.
Sure.
There's like ancient wisdom combined with modern scientific research, but obviously just in their nature, such a mind-blowing, comprehensive, holistic experience that it's hard to, think about, I don't know, a B12 shot or NAD plus while so psychedelics, it just seems so small in the order of what that might be. So I feel like there's yeah, I mean that's the convergence I'm hoping will happen.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and it's interesting to hear. I guess that was like the stem of my question to see, is it something that we didn't expect in terms of audience? No, no tech bros, no tech bro VC from Burning Man kind of
We
audience.
get Yeah, we get some of those for sure, and they're also like super welcome too. I mean, they're like psychonauts too, and they're obviously looking, the kind of person who's looking, whatever the reason they're looking to optimize, to get an edge, to be smarter, to have more energy, to like perform more. The tech guys, I think they've come at this from, one level. There was probably like a desire to party, which led them into, a zone of like experimenting with psychedelics, which inevitably, if you're a smart and grounded person, leads you to an exploration of bigger questions, I think. And, however you get there, I think is great. And I think that, at the same time, these people are incredibly smart. They're high achievers. They're people who are looking to, build some of the most innovative and complicated products the world has ever seen. And like, of course they want to get an edge. And of course they want to, I suppose be the version of their best selves. So, I think those people are very welcome too. I just, I think there's also, the bit of self-reflectiveness if anyone would, I don't know. I mean, sometimes I look at the tech community and feel like there's life altering decisions being made every day, and AI and social media and other things. And sometimes without a lot of moral reflection. And so I hope that,
For sure.
this is I hope that this is an opportunity for them to engage that too.
Have you listened to any of Naval Ravikant? Do you know who that is?
Actually.
He's this like a tech philosopher, and the tech community has fallen in love with this guy as of recently. Actually, with one of his big things is like we specifically in like high achieving, fast paced industries, we think way too little about decisions that we end up in for long time periods of time. Whether it's like
Uh-huh.
who we marry, where we live, what we do for work. We like decide in a month, and then we do it for 10 years, and that's kind of a problem. And he's got like a there's like some papers that have come out about what is the ideal time of making decisions. And I think the end of it was basically like a third of the time that you'll end up doing it, but that's not feasible because like if you're getting married for 60 years or 50 years and you spend 12 years figuring that out, it's obviously a tough one. Well, super cool. No, this is a super fascinating topic. I really appreciate it. I do want to jump into a quick rapid fire with you. I'm just going to ask
Sure.
you a question and give me the first thoughts that come to mind.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
what what is your most contrarian belief?
Hmm. Most contrarian belief. Well, I'm extremely contrarian and disagreeable by nature, actually. I don't know if that's detectable, but it's just like hilarious. My whole family is, and so something there. But it's hard for me to identify because, of course, everything that I believe I think is completely normal.
Yeah,
No, and
that's
everyone
fair.
should believe it. But I don't know. I'm a fairly extreme free speech proponent. In fact, I've kind of to the point where I have yeah, I mean, I think the last number of years have been really disturbed by what I see as, an attempt to almost, what's the word? I think the way I would describe it is that where we are ordering society around the needs of the most sensitive. And I think that that has a chilling effect, I think, on conversation, on ideas, on development of thought, and really on development of anything. And it's been really bothering me. So, one of the things we've been trying to do at Eudaimonia was to create a space where, just because, of course, when you have free speech, that means some people may indeed get offended. And obviously, that's not our goal, and I don't think that should be anyone's goal, but it's going to happen. And so the question is, how can you have respectful conversation that is open and wide ranging without, shutting people down either because of, tribal values or other things. So I think that's probably my most fervently held view. And I know there's a lot of people out there that disagree with me on that right now.
No, it's super fair.
So we'll see who wins out.
Yeah, no, super fair. Outside of health, where do you see the most opportunity today? Outside of health and events, I guess I have to specify.
Mm. Um, Well, I don't know. I'm kind of looking around at AI and thinking AI is coming to eat us all. And so what do I do in that? And sometimes I guess that makes me think about my hands and what I can create, like artisans, artists, writers, things. The thing what is irreplaceable about being human. And so, in some ways, I wonder if uh, increasing replaceability of human analytical reasoning will lead to an increase in value of creation of art and beautiful things, whatever those things may be.
For
That's
sure.
what I hope, and maybe that's the growth industry.
Yeah, no, that's super fair. What is the best thing that your parents taught you?
I think to work your ass off and tell the truth. um
There you go.
both my
I
dad
love it.
was dad was a yeah, he is, I think a very moral person, but also a very, strict person, a very hard worker. And, those two values have gotten me pretty far in life.
I love it. I love it. Well, Sean, thank you so much for hopping on the Silicon Fox podcast.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you. It's really fun.